Now, one big story in the papers today, Dipti, is that Jared Kushner is meeting with US state officials yesterday.
I did not collude with Russia. That's what he said yesterday before Senate investigators. Jared Kushner gave a statement to the press, the New York Times says, before his Senate appearance in what was a clear strategy to, quote, shape the narrative and portray Donald Trump's victory as a success of campaigning and not one due to Russian influence. Now, what's interesting is the website The Atlantic has penned quite an interesting article talking about how his statement reveals really how Russia is trying to sort of get contact with the Trump administration. The Atlantic says that the Russians tried numerous times to establish contact with the Trump campaign and later the Trump transition team. Kushner met several times with people like the Russian ambassador, but also a man called Sergei Gorkov, the head of a state-funded Russian bank. The Atlantic calls this Russian strategy a search, a, quote, process of poking and testing, of trying to find a pressure point. That's how they're experimenting with trying to get contact with the Trump team.
Now, the Washington Post has been rather a scathing opinion piece about him, haven't they?
Well, the Washington Post writer Dana Milbank writes that Kushner is really Trump's go-to man, the man who's, I quote, fixing problems for more than 300 million Americans. Yet when he's grilled about things like neglecting to mention on security clearance forms that he's met with foreigners, including Russians, Kushner's excuse is that he's new to the job and he didn't know. So for this writer, that leaves really one big question. Why is a man of such inexperience in charge of so much?
Now to India and China now, a standoff continuing in the Sikkim sector near Bhutan.
That's right. The Chinese and Indian military have been facing off for the past 5 weeks in the Sikkim sector. It's sort of in the east of India. It's over the Himalayan territory near Bhutan. India says that a Chinese road-building party crossed the border into Bhutan. It's a tiny kingdom which is dependent on India. So India says China crossed the border illegally. The Indian troops then asked China to retreat, and China accused India of illegally crossing into its territory. And for the last 5 weeks, there's been a military standoff.
Now, you found some editorial pieces, haven't you? This is both from Chinese and from Indian press.
Well, this really started off as a dispute just over border crossings, but it is escalating because, of course, China and India are two superpowers, and they're both not willing to back down. They're both willing to defend their interests. For LiveMint, which is an Indian financial website, this is not a bilateral but trilateral crisis. The paper says India needs to stand up for Bhutan at the risk of Bhutan being seduced by China. While China continues to hold a hardline stance, India has opted for a more restrained approach. The paper says now is a time for India to be more aggressive. And from the Chinese side, the Global Times, which is a state-run Chinese paper, is not mincing its words. In this op-ed, the paper says if India chooses an all-out military showdown, I quote, Beijing will fight to the end to safeguard its territory.
Sad story, this next one. In the UK, the parents of Charlie Gard, sick 11-month-old boy, they've made rather a heartbreaking decision, haven't they?
It's on the front page of the Daily Mail, the British tabloid. Sleep tight, our beautiful little boy. That's what the tabloid says on its front page, re-quoting Connie Yates, the mother of Charlie Gard. His parents will now take him off life support after a high-profile and very intense battle that to take him to the U.S. for experimental treatment, which was denied by the courts. Well, now they've considered that even if they could, it's too late for the little boy. He's not going to make it. We're sorry we couldn't save you. That's what his mother said yesterday in a heartbreaking speech in British court.
Yeah, Charlie Gard's fight for survival became highly politicised, in fact, didn't it?
It did. It became really politicised because it sort of became an issue of pro-life or pro-courts, I guess. So who has the rights to decide the fate of a little boy? The Guardian has written, there's an interesting opinion piece in The Guardian, which really says that while his case is tragic, we do need to respect the court's decision because a court's sole concern is the interests of a child and the child, that child itself. And the court is capable of transcending emotion. Now, in the conservative press, we're seeing a completely different view, in particular from the Wall Street Journal. The editors there have penned an editorial today saying, well, they basically blame a system that elevated a judge's opinion about what's best for Charlie over that of his parents. The brutal reality, the paper says, is when a state is responsible for health spending, it takes responsibility for life and death too.
Yeah, sad story there. Now we're going to end with some news that has tech fans up in arms. Now, Microsoft Future Windows, Stephen was talking about this earlier on, they're not going to include the famous drawing program Paint anymore.
That's right, the Paint program that really defined at least my generation, and I know a lot of people around me. Initially, Microsoft actually wanted to retire Paint, but there was so much outrage that they've decided that they're going to leave it available for download. But it won't be a compulsory part of future Windows programs. Now, they really, I guess, it's clear that Microsoft want to move on to more high-tech things. But for many people, you know, Paint is the one thing we all learned to draw on, really. The tech website Wired says for many people, saying goodbye to Paint is like, quote, technological gentrification. It feels like we're losing a window into a simpler time when computer literacy was as simple as dragging your mouse to make a masterpiece. Although, for me, I never, ever made a masterpiece in Paint.
No, I have to say felt tip pens is what I grew up using. Yeah, maybe of a slightly different era to you two guys on set, but I don't know about Paint. Anyway, thank you very much. That's Dipsy and Stephen on France 24. Very latest news right after the break, so don't go away.